Dubai has spent 20 years telling the world one story: bigger, faster, richer. Every year another record. The tallest building, the busiest airport, the most visited mall on the planet. And for a long time that story held up. But in early 2026, something happened that the glossy brochures never quite prepared anyone for. And if you stick with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through what changed, why it changed, and why this single stretch of months might shift how people look at Dubai's growth story going forward. Quick note before we dive in. This video is for educational and commentary purposes only, discussing publicly reported events and industry trends, not financial or travel advice. And if you're someone who likes pulling back the curtain on the cities and economies that headlines rarely question, hit subscribe right now, because this channel, Strategic Dynamics Edge, is built entirely around stories like this one. So let's start where every great city's story actually starts. Not with skyscrapers, but with its airport. Because an airport is the heartbeat of a city like Dubai. It's not just where planes land, it's where tourists arrive, where business deals get carried in on a suitcase, where money enters the local economy before a single dirham gets spent in a hotel or a mall. For years, Dubai's airport had been breaking its own records year after year, climbing toward the symbolic milestone of 100 million passengers annually. Officials celebrated it publicly. It became part of the national identity, proof that Dubai was the indisputable crossroads of the world. Then, in the early months of 2026, regional tensions in the Middle East escalated. Airspace restrictions and flight rerouting created real operational challenges for airlines and travelers in and around the region. And according to several travel industry reports, passenger traffic at Dubai's main airport fell sharply during the disruption, temporarily reversing years of accumulated growth in the span of just a few weeks. Here's the part worth sitting with. When a hub like this slows down, the impact doesn't stay contained to the airport. It tends to ripple outward into an entire chain of connected industries. Think of Dubai's economy like a row of dominoes standing upright. The first domino is the airport. The next domino is the hotels. After that, the malls. After that, the restaurants, the taxis, the tour operators, the retail staff. An entire ecosystem of jobs and revenue that depends on a steady flow of people arriving and spending. When the first domino wobbles, the dominoes after it tend to wobble too, often faster than anyone expects. Several hospitality industry sources reported a noticeable wave of booking cancellations within days of the airspace disruptions. Occupancy rates that had reportedly been sitting near multi-year highs dropped significantly compared with those earlier levels, according to regional hotel industry reporting. And this wasn't isolated to Dubai. Travel and tourism analysts tracking the broader Middle East reported that overall visitor arrivals across the region declined by double digits in the first quarter of 2026, according to industry estimates. Some analysts suggested the region was losing a substantial amount in visitor spending per day during the most disrupted weeks, though exact figures vary depending on the source, so it's worth treating those numbers as estimates rather than confirmed totals. Still, even as estimates, they point to something real. A regional tourism sector that took a serious hit. And Dubai, as one of the most internationally connected cities in that region, was among the most exposed to that disruption. Now let's talk about the malls, because this is where the story gets even more interesting and arguably more revealing about how the city's model actually works underneath the marketing. On paper, Dubai's retail sector looks unstoppable. The city's flagship malls have repeatedly been ranked among the most visited retail destinations on the planet. Footfall numbers in the tens of millions. Rents in prime fashion districts climbing year after year. Vacancy rates near zero in the most prestigious wings. If you only read the press releases, you'd assume Dubai's retail economy was untouchable. But look one layer deeper and the picture gets more complicated. The headline numbers you see are driven largely by a small handful of flagship destinations, 2 or 3 megamalls that act almost like gravitational centers, pulling a disproportionate share of consumer attention and tourist footfall toward themselves. Meanwhile, reports on the broader retail leasing market have pointed to a slower picture across dozens of smaller community malls and mid-tier centers, with new leasing activity reportedly softening even during years when the flagship malls were posting record visitor numbers. In other words, even in the so-called good years, there were signs of a retail market splitting into two different realities: a few dominant destinations and a wider layer of retail space working harder to stay relevant in their shadow. Then the 2026 disruption hit, and even the flagship malls weren't fully insulated. With fewer international tourists arriving, footfall at some major malls reportedly dropped over a period of weeks. Trade publications covering the luxury retail sector reported that boutique sales in some of Dubai's most prestigious shopping districts fell noticeably compared to the same period the year before. Though again, these are figures reported by industry sources rather than official numbers, so they're best understood as directional rather than exact. This was also happening at a moment when global luxury spending was already cooling after the post-pandemic shopping boom, which meant Dubai's retail sector was arguably dealing with two pressures at once: a slower global appetite for luxury goods and a sharper local dip in the international visitors that luxury retail depends on most. So here's the real question this raises, and it's worth sitting with for a second. If a city builds a large part of its economic identity around the assumption that people will keep flying in without interruption, what happens in the stretch of time when that flow slows down? That's the underlying dynamic sitting beneath a lot of Dubai's record-breaking headlines. A large portion of the city's tourism-driven sectors, hotels, malls, restaurants, even parts of the real estate market, depends heavily on continued international arrivals. That's not a flaw unique to Dubai. Plenty of tourism-dependent cities work this way. But Dubai sits in a region that experiences periodic geopolitical instability. And when that instability flares up, the city's tourism economy can slow significantly and create ripple effects across related industries, even if the underlying product, the malls, the hotels, the experience, hasn't changed at all. To be fair, Dubai has bounced back from shocks before. During the pandemic, global travel collapsed and airport traffic dropped sharply worldwide, Dubai included, and the city did eventually recover and continue growing. So there's a real possibility the 2026 disruption follows a similar pattern: a sharp dip, followed by a recovery once regional tensions ease and travel normalizes. That's entirely plausible, and if it happens, Dubai will likely be back to publishing record numbers within a year or two. But there's another possibility worth considering. For a while now, there's been a quiet undercurrent of people, investors, expats, frequent travelers, weighing whether the cost of living, the climate, the distance from family, and now periodic regional risk make long-term life or business in Dubai worth it. A disruption like this doesn't necessarily create that hesitation out of nowhere. It can accelerate decisions some people were already considering. And for global brands deciding where to anchor their Middle East presence long-term, a stretch like early 2026 likely becomes one more data point in that decision, not something forgotten the following quarter. So next time you see a press release celebrating another record-breaking year out of Dubai, here's what's worth remembering. The headline number and the fuller picture aren't always the same thing. A record tells you what happened on a strong day. It doesn't always tell you how the system behaves on a difficult one. And in a region where disruptions can resurface without much warning, that gap between the best stretch and the hardest stretch might be the more useful number to pay attention to. If this kind of breakdown, looking past the headline toward the fuller picture, is something you'd like more of, that's genuinely what Strategic Dynamics Edge is about. So do me a favor, drop a comment with your take. Do you think Dubai bounces back stronger, or do you think this points to a longer-term shift? I read the comments, and they genuinely shape what we cover next. And if you found this useful, share it with someone who tends to take a shiny skyline at face value, because the fuller story is usually a bit more layered than that. One last note, this video is intended for educational and commentary purposes only. It discusses publicly reported events, industry trends, and general economic analysis, not financial, investment, or travel advice. Figures and estimates referenced come from industry and media reporting and may vary between sources, so it's worth consulting multiple sources before making any financial, business, or travel decisions.